Hey leaders, in this episode of Building a Culture of Collaboration, I'm joined by Tyler Comeau, an Alberta school principal who also shares and extends learning related to our core elements as the Elemental Educator. In this episode, Tyler and I are going to discuss how to establish and sustain a culture of collaboration in a small school and how to ensure ongoing connection to our elements of earth, water, wind, and fire. So let's get started.
Intentional and purposeful focus on building a culture of collaboration is the secret for leaders striving to make a difference. In building a culture of collaboration, Kurtis and Lorna Hewson will share simple tips, ideas, and strategies to take your organization's collaborative efforts to the next level.
Welcome to episode 17 of Building a Culture of Collaboration. As always, I'm Kurtis Hewson, co-founder and lead learner of Jigsaw Learning. Normally, I would have my partner in work and life, Lorna, to be part of this conversation, but today I'm flying solo, but super happy to be joined by Tyler Comeau, principal of Dewberry School in Buffalo Trails Public Schools in Alberta, Canada. You may also know Tyler as the Elemental Educator, host of a podcast of the same name, and I'm excited to share author of a soon-to-be-released book that's in the works. So excited to learn all about this work, but let's get started as we do with all of our guests by saying welcome. Tyler, it's so great to have you join for this conversation.
Hey, Kurtis, thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Well, we always start with asking our guests to give a little bit of a background. Give us a bit of an understanding as your path as an educator, because I know from some of our conversations, yours was a little bit different of going from tennis coach to educator to school principal. That's not the typical path that we'd see. So share a little bit about what's brought you here to us today.
Well, I think, I think it's actually moderately typical because it follows the same timeline of people discover that they like to help people and then they get into education for that reason.
Yeah.
So I grew up in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, and you would think that it's just winter all the time there, but we do get summer months. And in the summer months, I liked to play tennis, and I got into the coaching aspect of it. And, a part of how I earned money in my summer job as a student was to do tennis lessons. And I ran it for kids, I ran it for adults. And then I got asked to start running it in schools. And then I got asked to start flying to remote communities in the Northwest Territories and bringing my equipment with me and teaching tennis in these remote communities. And it was so much fun. I loved getting to do something that I loved doing. I loved getting to share my passion. Uh, the best part of it, though, was when you would run into somebody that you taught a lesson to, whether it was a kid that recognized you or whether it was an adult that recognized you from your nights that you ran things. And they came over and they initiated conversation and they said, hey, and they said how things are going. And they gave an update about, their life, all because you connected with them through something you were trying to do. And I thought that was really cool. And then I went to school and said, well, I don't want to do anything with that. I wanted to get into physiotherapy.
Yeah.
So I went and did a Bachelor of Science. And about midway through the kinesiology program, I was running a tennis program down in Lethbridge. The same style. I was working with kids. I was working with adults. I was trying to get into schools and do some things there. And that's what I really liked doing. I didn't really like the whole the physiotherapy practicum that I was trying to accumulate hours to put in an application to the U of A. And it wasn't until the last year of the Bachelor of Science that I said, I think I want to get into education instead. And I'd been told by many people, you should become a teacher. You should become a teacher. I went into schools and the teachers I'd get reviews on so I could try to get more into more schools. And they'd say, we'd hire you as a teacher. And I tried it out. I went into the after degree education program and, I fell in love with it because everything that I got to experience when I coached tennis, I got to see as a teacher.
Yeah.
And I got paid a little bit more to do it.
Yeah.
And I got to do it year round and it came with benefits. And it was the exact same model of, I really liked to make a difference in people's lives. And I found a way to do that as a job. And when I was able to connect those two things, it made it that much more fun and that much easier. So, I kicked off, my very first job was actually a Hutterite colony. So it was about 13 kids in grades 1 to 10.
Yeah.
We had a single room. It was probably the size of the office I'm in right now. No gym, no technology. And we had a blast. And the relationships that got built were incredible. And then I got to go into a junior high, and then I moved, and I restarted I went from Alberta to Saskatchewan. And I kept thinking, I want to make a bigger impact. I want to do more. I want to have a bigger outreach. So
Mhm.
I went and did my master's and thought, I'm going to get in. I could try to get into leadership. And I pestered HR enough until I got an interview, and they gave me a shot, and I went from an assistant principal to a principal, and here we are today, still living off that dream of impact and trying to make a difference in people's lives.
I'm super excited to hear that. And thank you for sharing, Tyler. We had talked about, I had the chance to come on your podcast last week, and that theme of, trying to make an impact really came through in our conversation as well. And I really do think that's often a common um, starting point for us in education is I want to make an impact. And then you start to see, okay, how could I expand that impact? And it leads into leadership roles. So I'd love to know a little bit about the context that you're in now as the principal lead learner at Dewberry School. Tell us a little bit about Dewberry.
Yeah. And I might not be the best person to tell you about it because I don't live here,
Yeah.
and I've only been here not even a full year yet. We're just wrapping up the first year here, but I can tell you what I do know. And what I do know is this is a very tight-knit community. We're small, we're rural.
Mhm.
Our school has a private kindergarten, and then we're grades 1 to 12 throughout.
Okay.
And our student population is less than 100. And so we have multi-grade classrooms, and we get innovative and creative with how we deliver instruction to still give high quality education and individualize that learning for each kid. We are pushing out new initiatives, and so one of the cool things that's been here before I got here is we actually have a live chicken coop just in our field, and we do an in-person green certificate where kids look after laying hens from before they start laying to after they start laying, and the whole process in between. And we give them 16 high school credits for completing the in-person green certificate. And we're pushing some new initiatives. We have a bus that's getting donated to our school for the purpose of shelling out and converting into a greenhouse. And
Hmm.
right beside our chicken coop, we're going to have uh, a full year greenhouse that we've now put some compost bins in front of to go to full cycle farming so that we can try to go to zero waste. Strapping some solar panels on top, we're going to try to go zero emissions too. And by doing all of that, there's some grants that we can throw into there. And, we sat here and we said, as a team, we have an opportunity this year to hit a reset button. And we get the opportunity every year to hit a reset button and think about what does our year look like. And we had some very good conversations around, if we ever have extra dollars, what do we want to spend them on? And we talked about spending them on sustainable things for this building. And so with that, we've also purchased some, I guess I would say, higher processing computers so that we can get kids into digital programming, tap into the esport world, trying to just give more to kids with what we have here, because what we have here is pretty great. So it's like I said, it's a small rural school where everybody's just a family, and it's incredible to be at.
I'm always fascinated, and I grew up in a small rural community as well as a youngster, and then have worked in several rural communities as well. And there's often that misnomer out there of, well, you can't offer as much as some of our larger schools, maybe some of the metro schools. But I don't think what people realize is being small allows you to be agile, allows you to be innovative. And really, I hear some of the most innovative things coming from smaller schools with the intention of just, we're trying to provide opportunities for our students that are engaging, but then student driven as well. So that's super exciting to hear.
Yeah.
So you talked about and just laid it out in the, as a team, we want to be able to do this. So I'd love to tap into that idea. We often hear lots of people say, well, we have a team at our school, but there's varying definitions or realities of when they say that, what do they mean? So in your perspective, when you say team, what does that involve or mean for you, Tyler?
That's a great question, Curtis. When I say team, I interchange it with the word stakeholder,
Mhm.
and my team is all of my stakeholders. And so when I reference my team, I'm referring to everybody that has a contact point in this school in some way, shape, or form. So my team is the kids in the building. My team is my teachers. My team is my educational assistants. My team is my custodians, my office administrator, my parents, their grandparents, the local businesses that are around us in the area, my central office team, the leaders and teachers in the schools that neighbor us. When I talk about my team, I talk about everybody that could have a contact point here.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting when you think about that idea of the team being broader than just the employed educators or support staff within the school, but seeing it as broader. And obviously, in order to engage and focus that stakeholder team, it really comes back to, do we have a guiding mission and vision that we've established? So love for you to talk a little bit about some things that you've done or you've learned around operationalizing these key guiding elements of mission and vision. We hear them often used, but in your mind, how do you go about actualizing that as a leader?
Thanks for that. And something that's important to note as well is stakeholders have different levels of salience or legitimacy, authority, value, and urgency when they have a conversation with you. And the first thing you have to do is understand, when you're working with each stakeholder, what level of authority do they have, what level of urgency do they have, and what level of legitimacy do they have to be having these conversations. And once you kind of establish that level of transparency, the team can become a lot more collaborative, because there's a collective understanding of what everyone's bringing to the table.
Yeah.
I can tell you that parents are always going to fight for their kid because their kid is in the school. They have urgency because they're directly impacted right now.
Yeah.
Right. That being said, depending on who you ask, grandparents might not have that same level of urgency. Right. But they're a valued stakeholder because they have the experience of what's around. Now, I know I got off topic there, but when we talk about operationalizing a mission and vision, this is something that resonates with me a lot, because I've been in 3 schools in 3 years, and I want to be able to, and wherever I go next, you need to be able to walk in day one and be effective. That doesn't mean do everything right and do everything great, but you need to have a sense of what you're doing. And the best way to do that is to look at what the missions and visions are of the building you're going into. In my podcast, in my book, I talk about the earth a lot, and the earth is the core values that you have, and they are your personal mission, your personal vision on where you want to take things. And every decision that you make should be rooted in your earth in some way, shape, or form, because then it makes those decisions not feel like extreme risks that are dangerous, and it makes those risks exciting. That doesn't change when you're working in a school. That doesn't change when you're working for a motor company. That doesn't change if you're working for any organization. Their mission and their vision are their earth. And all of the decisions that they make after that need to connect back to their earth, their core values. And so when we talk about how to operationalize one, well, just about every school in all of the world is going to have some kind of mission that's along the lines of, we're going to make kids feel safe, and we're going to give them the best learning, and we're going to do it together.
Yeah.
And any building you're walking into, if that's your guiding values, how are you doing that? And how are all of the decisions you're making linking back to how was that best for kids? How are you making it safe where people feel comfortable? And how are you opening the door for collaboration so that they're not just doing it alone? And if you don't have answers to those things, then the decisions you're making aren't aligned to the values of the organization you're in. And there needs to be some sort of intervention process to make sure there's alignment. Because as soon as you don't have alignment, you're going to have conflict and disagreement around where people are trying to take things.
Absolutely. Well, Tyler, I'm really interested, and I know our viewers and listeners will be as well. And you've kind of set a bit of the groundwork of talking about your earth. So I know, in being a listener of your podcast, The Elemental Educator, and then having a chance to engage in a previous conversation with you, these elements that you speak of are really critical. And I love the way that you've come to internalize, but then also effectively communicate. What do we mean when we talk about the elements? So can I get you to just share with those that are viewing and listening, when you talk about your elements, what are they? And what do each one of those mean to you as far as a leader? We'll be right back to continue this episode. I wish we had more data, said no teacher ever. Our contemporary schools have an abundance of data we can be accessing to inform decision making from the classroom level to the school level and beyond. Data as a focal point is no longer elusive. The challenge lies in structuring and presenting it in a way that facilitates easy interpretation and actionable insights. How we organize the data matters. My name is Kurtis Hewson, lead learner and co-founder of Jigsaw Learning. In this free on-demand webinar, I'm going to be sharing with you 5 mistakes leaders make when organizing data for their teams. Access this webinar, and in addition to how to address these 5 mistakes, numerous free resources will be shared with you that you can begin using immediately. I can't wait to have you join me to ensure you aren't committing one or several of these mistakes within your own organization. And now back to our conversation.
Yeah, let me start off by saying everyone's an alchemist. Everyone has the ability to interact with the elements. You're all elemental educators. Whether you're in education or whether you're not in education, you interact with these almost daily, almost hourly with these. And everybody has earth, air, and water within them. Earth is your core values. It's what guides you. It's your foundation. They are, saying that they're vague in general statements is incorrect. They can be very specific, but an example of one could be to inspire. You might be rooted in a value to inspire people. You might be rooted in a value of trust and integrity, right? With that comes the idea of air, and that's how you face adversity. And I use the flow of going with the wind with things. And how do you embrace the barriers that are put in your way and navigate around them? And that's within us. The barriers that we face are external, but how we choose to navigate them is up to us. And that's why
I would assume then, and sorry to interrupt there, Tyler.
That's okay.
I would assume it would be hard to navigate that element of air or wind if you're don't have a good understanding of your earth, your values. Would that be fair to say?
You need your core. You need to have your earth. And that brings it to the water, which is the fluid dynamics in which we embrace change. Because I say this many times, but change is the only constant in our lives. Things are always changing. And we need to navigate that. We might be slammed with different types of whirling winds in the air and all of the adversity, but we also need to have plans on how we face that and move forward and implement change in our own ways. If you're a leader, and if you're a teacher, you're a leader. If you're a parent, you're a leader. If you work any kind of job, you do lead in some way, shape, or form. And you do make decisions that are leadership-driven decisions. So you need to know how your water's flowing, which is also impacted by your core values. It needs to drive back to that. Mm-hmm. And the last element that I talk about is actually more of an external element. It's that fire, and it's that flame or that igniting source where passion comes from. And it's where the idea to take risks and make decisions comes from. And you really only have to do those when you're interacting with the external from you.
Yeah.
So everybody can interact with fire. And this is where playing with fire comes from with me, is you get to choose how much fire you're playing with. And how you root that back to your earth, and how you accept it with your air, and how you want to create your plan with your water to move forward dictates how you can control that burn. And so Elemental Educator is a holistic approach to just overall leadership decision-making processes and how we can optimize that to be the best versions of ourselves.
I'm really intrigued by that. And I've spent time listening to you and reading through this as well. And I was struck with the idea that we have these as individuals, are elements of earth, water, wind, and then attending to the fire, as you say. But would it be fair to say that then organizational cultures also have the same? Like, I could imagine that I might have my own personal grounded values, for instance, but then the organization or the culture that I'm working within or even leading would have their own set. And of course, we would hope there would be some alignment, but would it be fair to say that then organizations would have their own elements as part of their culture as well?
Well, yeah, of course. And in an era where we are constantly evolving, we have to adapt to new approaches, new technology, more diversity. And so Elemental Educator and the way the elements work, they emphasize the importance of core values, emotional engagement, holistic learning to provide not just individuals, but it could be organizations with tools they need to create a dynamic environment that's optimized for them. So you're absolutely right. And if you look at it as just an individual approach, that's a great way to do it for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You can also look at it in an organizational approach.
Yeah, absolutely. So then I'm curious, Tyler, in your mind or in your experience as well, how do you attend in an organization where you may have individuals whose let's use water for example, the ability to be fluid, to be able to change, where the organizational ability to adjust and change may not be aligned with an individual's. How do you go about helping to support so that there is an alignment between organizational and individual elements?
You connect it back to earth and you come back to why are we doing this? Because people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. I think Simon Sinek said that. And I'm a
Yeah.
huge Simon Sinek fan. And you need to know the why so that you can establish personal interest and so that you can establish your own individual ownership over what you're trying to do. And if people aren't invested in what you're trying to do, then it's very difficult to get buy-in. And
Mhm.
so when you are trying to implement a change, I'm not going to walk into a room and say, oh, hey, and by the way, I know we all use Google Chrome and we use Google Classroom. Next year, we're just shifting to Microsoft Teams. I'm not going to walk in and say that because that will automatically be met with some resistance. Well, why do we have to do that? That doesn't make sense. And there's going to be some people that say, that sounds great. I love it.
Yeah.
If you walk in and say, we can do this better and we need to do it better because it will save us time. And if we can save time off of all of our organization, we can spend more time doing what matters, which is being there for kids, which is supporting kids, which is promoting innovation, creativity. And if you sell it that way by starting with your why, our job, our mission is to do what's best for kids. Our mission is to show personal growth and achievement in every individual. Well, it makes that water a little bit easier to navigate. It
Mhm.
makes selling it a little bit easier because you're not just saying here's what we're doing, you're saying here's why we're doing it first. Now here's what we're doing.
You know, as I'm hearing you, Tyler, I'm reflecting back on a mentor of mine that had once said, if you can ensure that every decision that is being made, often collectively, but sometimes there's going to be decisions you have to make as a leader. If you can always ground it, and they didn't have the same language that you're utilizing here, but ground it in for instance, we're doing this because we want what's best for kids. I think this could be something that helps us achieve that. They had said you can make a mistake and people might say, yeah, we took a misstep that we need to refine, or that didn't quite work. But if you can still ground it back to what you're saying, to those core values, be able to say, okay, the path was incorrect, but the why wasn't. We just maybe took a misstep on how best to accomplish that
And
why.
that's a lot easier to fix because now
Yeah.
we're getting into the idea of failing forward, where
Yeah.
the only way you can learn is by knowing what was done wrong to then do right, right?
Yeah.
It's the only way to learn is to improve a mistake or to improve something that didn't work, right? When we get into that, what you're doing by connecting with your earth is you're creating a space that where when failure happens, people don't want to stop. They want to look at that and say, that didn't work. We need to still figure out what's best for kids because that was our earth. That was our why. Let's find another way.
I love that. It reminds me of something I heard just recently in another conversation with someone who said that old adage of experience is the best teacher. This person said, I don't believe that's true. I believe reflecting on experience is the best teacher. And that really rang true to me of, just I have these experiences that have led me to this. Well, you can have all these experiences, but if you haven't reflected on why did that go well, why did it not, what have I learned, and how am I moving forward, it's the reflection that's so critically important. So I'm interested then, Tyler, for what you said around that element of fire, and that's that risk-taking element. How do you, in your role as a school leader, help support people in taking a risk that, might not work, but it's still grounded in our values? How do you go about doing that with a team, whether that's a team of people in your school or that larger stakeholder group that you're talking about?
So the first thing is I'm never going to be the one to push somebody over the ledge. I'm not going to sit there and say, yes, you're doing this. There are circumstances I should come back. There are circumstances where I have to do that. But when we're talking about, generic risk taking, it's my job to be the facilitator, just like we are as teachers in a classroom, just like you are as an owner of a business. It's your job to oversee the operation of what you're overseeing, of what you're in control of. And so when I'm helping people navigate their fire, my job is to make sure they know what their values are and to know what their earth is. Because if you can justify the risk you're taking to your earth element, one, it doesn't feel as big of a risk because it now becomes something you're interested in. It now becomes something you're excited about,
Invested
and invested in, and you have ownership over. And it's no longer a, oh my God, what happens if this is a total failure? It turns into I'm really excited to try this. And we'll see what happens. So the way that I help people start by navigating their fire and playing with fire is to make sure they have a really strong earth. And if anything, I hope that that's the foundation I'm laying down right now, is you cannot do anything else unless you know your value. That's why organizations spend so much money, so much time on establishing their missions, visions, and value statements, because it roots everything for them. So to play with fire, you have to know your earth. That being said, you also have to be comfortable with adjusting to the wind and rolling with some water. So we also need to navigate, okay, so when we potentially see down the road, what are some barriers that might come your way? And what do we need to do to overcome it? So I pull this from 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I love to think with the end in mind. Because when you're taking a risk, you also need to think about, what are the outcomes? What are the outcomes of what I'm taking this risk for? And what are the potential barriers in the way of each of those outcomes? What's going to lead me to that path of that outcome? And once you kind of have that end in mind of where you see it going, again, it makes that risk a lot easier.
Yeah. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, Tyler, to go into the weeds a little bit on this. And can you share a specific example where you've initiated this a risk that we're going to try as a school, and walk us through what that looked like as you grounded in your organizational values? What does that look like in a really specific context?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had a decision to make at the start of the year where the funds that we had could be spent on staffing, status quo, keeping things even keel for the following year. The year after that, going into year 2, we wouldn't have that funding. We would potentially lose a staff member. And as a result of that, we would have taken those dollars and spent it to solve a problem for 1 year and then paid for it the following years.
Okay, excellent.
The alternative to that was a conversation around, do we want to take a risk instead of just keeping status quo? And do we want to take that money that we could potentially reserve and spend towards maintaining staff? And do we want to take that and say, we know what's going to happen year 2. Let's actually take these funds and put them towards things that are going to benefit us for the next 10 years, 15 years, instead of just that 1 year rolling into year 2 with potentially nothing.
Okay.
And so where that happened is we came down to, what's the earth? What are we trying to do? What is best for kids? What is giving opportunity? What is giving innovation? What is being creative? How are we promoting individual growth, digital citizenship, global citizenship, academic performance all at the same time? And if you went the route of spending your dollars 1 year to retain staff, you would get there. You can justify all of that to your earth.
Mhm.
And you can also get there by saying, here's the way to do it with the next 10 years in sustainability items, like new technology in your school, like incorporating a land-based agricultural program in your building, like supporting an elementary classroom by investing in some flexible seating that they're going to have for the next 10 years. Just like that, both of those decisions got justified by the earth element, got justified by the value. Neither one was a bad decision. Where it comes from there is, what are the potential barriers and how do we navigate them? So now we're talking about the air and what we're going to be facing. You cannot do that alone. You need to engage your team. And remember, by team, I talked about stakeholders. I talked about central office, teachers, parents, students. So you start having your school council meetings, and you start having student talk meetings and student council meetings, and you make intent of connecting with your central office, and you say, here's what I'm faced with. What do you think? And there's a perception out there that if you do that and you approach central office, that you're weak, and that's why can't you do it on your own? Well, this is collaboration. You're getting the input from the people around you. And by doing it through your school council meetings and student council meetings and staff meetings, PL days, having these meaningful conversations, you're getting the collective mindset on how everybody else views these values of earth and what they think is important. And so through that, we made the decision to invest in the technology in our school. So we're getting into esport next year. We're going to also leverage the computers we're getting to get into esport to be able to offer better 3D printing courses, computer design, graphic design. We have a sublimation machine that we're going to be able to make better content on because our computers can process better information. We have that bus donation I talked about that we're going to be converting into a greenhouse. There's some expenses along the way. Like, we will need to purchase the solar panels. We are investing in the compost bins. We do have to buy the soil and the seed themselves, right? Mm. These are investments that are going to grow the school. We're not having solar panels for 1 year. We're not having compost bins for 1 year. We're not having these computers in our building for 1 year. And I think if we made the other decision, we would still look back and say, hey, this is good. It's rooted in our earth. But we chose this route, and we look back at it and we say, hey, this is good. It's rooted in our earth. And we're still excited about it because we made that connection. So I hope that's what you were looking for. When
it
you
is
said a real
exactly
example.
that's beautiful. And I think what you've really helped delineate is the idea that effective collaboration takes time and it's messy. You could have gone to your staff and say, here's our two options, let's vote. And whichever option gets the most votes, that's what we'll go with. But collaboration is much more involved to be able, the true collaboration, much
Absolutely.
more involved and messy.
Mm-hmm. And it could have been a setting as well, where I just said, here were the two options. I picked this one.
Yeah.
And that would have not gone over well.
No, you're not leveraging the expertise within that vast stakeholder group that you're talking about.
And that's what you talked about earlier, though, about experience, where what we actually did was we used the reflective experience of the group.
Speak a little more about that. What do you mean by that, Tyler?
So
I think that's a really critical component.
Yeah, of course. You had mentioned that, the best thing you can do is leverage the experience around you. And I could have just went to the longest standing teacher and said, you have the most experience. What should I do?
Yeah.
That's not what this is. That is not leveraging experience. That's going to somebody that's just done it for a long time who might have not done it well.
Yeah.
But what you're doing instead is you're taking a look, and if you're connecting to all of these people, right? Now you're tapping into what knowledge can you share, and whether or not that it was the right knowledge or the wrong knowledge, because you've sourced yourself out to such a variety, you have this ubiquitous view of what perspective is. And that makes it easier.
Well, I think you've also referenced, and I hear this over and over, every guest that we have allude to it in some way when leading a culture of collaboration, is there has to be a level of humility and vulnerability in that. I mean, you even saying, I may look like I'm weak, or that, well, shouldn't you have the answers? Why are you reaching out? But it's modeling that vulnerability that's so important if you're truly leading that culture of collaboration.
Absolutely.
Being able to say, I don't have the answers, but collectively we can get there. So I'm really interested, Tyler, and I'm sure that for those listening and viewing are wondering too, when you speak of these elements and how they connect, you've obviously put a lot of thought and reading application to this. I'm really interested in the genesis. Where did this start for you? How did you come upon this idea of elements to be able to describe this process of establishing values, looking at change, adapting to change, and taking risk as part of that decision making?
Yeah. Well, let me start by saying I'm a nerd and I love science. And when I started teaching grade 9 science, I got to teach about the creation of matter. And when we started talking the creation of matter, I got to talk about Aristotle, who pushed out to the world that everything around us was comprised of the 4 elements. And we believed him for 2,000 years until Democritus came out. Democritus was the same time as Aristotle. I should clarify that. But he challenged it by saying, actually, I think it's made of atoms. And nobody believed him. And we went with Aristotle. And I got to teach that. We know, though, that matter is not created from the 4 elements. But that concept and how those elements played and the holistic approach to it was always fascinating to me. And then from there, when I got into my master's, I was doing my capstone, and it was a totally irrelevant conversation in the moment. But somebody just turned to me when I was having this conversation around what the elements mean, and they go, "You could write a book. You could write a book. You should write a book about that." And I said, "I don't know if I could write a book." And then from there, it turned into, I don't want to just write a book with it. I want to make it a platform.
Yeah.
And I started thinking about our earlier conversation around impact zone and what can I impact and where can I go? And I always said I wanted to become a teacher to have a bigger impact. And then I became a teacher and said, wow, that's really cool. I want to be a principal to have a bigger impact. And then I became a principal and I said, wow, this is really cool. I want to become a superintendent to have a bigger impact. And then I got exposed to the world of consulting. And I started my doctorate. And through that, realized how many doors are actually open for us if we just look for where those doors are. So the creation of this was actually, I was in the middle of a PD session with Morgan Michael. And she said, why not? What's holding you back? If you're not doing something that excites you and you're not doing something that you truly believe is going where you want it to go, then why aren't you doing it? What's holding you back? And I said, nothing's holding me back, actually. And so the next day I sat down and I was plugging away at my book a little bit since then. And I went in and I finished it. And then I said, I'm going to launch a podcast to just connect with anybody that wants to have the conversation around the elements. And then, so the ultimate goal from this is still to inspire. That's my earth. It's still to inspire and to reach out to people. And for me, this platform, Elemental Educator, and holistically looking at the elements, it's what I believe in. It's how I approach everything that I deal with. And it's about wanting to inspire the biggest scale I can. If the intro to my podcast says, I'm trying to make a difference on a global scale. And I'm very true to that. So this is my outreach. And it came from what kind of impact zone can we really have?
Awesome. I'm nodding away. If for anyone who's just listening to the audio, you missed seeing me nod and smile as Tyler was sharing that as well. So I'm curious, Tyler, from your perspective, what advice would you give leaders that they could begin actioning tomorrow when they're endeavoring to establish and refine that culture of collaboration that I believe is so critical in our organizations? what suggestion would you give to them? We'll be right back to continue this episode. Collaborative response is an organizational mindset that involves some fundamental shifts for schools and districts, such as layering collaborative team structures, transforming how we talk about student needs, focusing on students close to meeting expectations through thoughtful organization of data and evidence, and ensuring the tiering of supports rather than students. Join us for the online course Collaborative Response 101. That takes approximately 2 hours to complete. This is an ideal course for leaders to gain an understanding of this robust school-wide framework. In this online course, there are 6 modules, starting with an introduction to support you in navigating the course, followed by 4 modules of content. This includes the foundations of collaborative response, collaborative structures and processes, data and evidence, and continuum of supports. The final module is focused on wrapping up your learning. We're excited to provide this learning for you in an easily accessible course, which provides you with a flexible learning platform so you can complete it when you are able and return to any portion at a later date. Join us today to learn more about collaborative response and how you can use this powerful framework in your school. And now back to our conversation.
I would give 3, actually.
Awesome.
The first one that I would give is invest in relationships. You need to, it is imperative that you build connections. You need to create trust. You need to create support. You need to create comfort. So you need to start by investing in the relationships that you have with the people around you.
I'm going to interrupt there for a second because I firmly believe that you create trust and comfort in relationships, because if we're truly collaborating, we're going to create discomfort at some point. And
absolutely,
how do we navigate that? Sorry to interrupt, please
continue.
No,
and you're totally right, because you get down to the stage of the forming, the norming, the storming, and the reforming stages if we want to go down that route too. But that being said, you can't get to the discomfort unless you've built some kind of level of comfort.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just awkward. So no, you absolutely need to invest in the relationship. And if you're somebody that runs a business by yourself, you need to invest in the relationship with yourself, because you need to be comfortable with yourself too. Because there are going to be times where there's discomfort within your own self as well. I think they call that imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And that's discomfort. So invest in the relationship. You also, I went to a program and I saw somebody talk, and they said, don't be a carpet walker. And at first I was like, what does that mean? What does that mean? Don't be a carpet walker. And then we thought about it and we said, the only spot in the majority of schools that is carpet is the office. And what they meant by that was spend more time in the hallway, in classrooms, than in your office. So lead by example. Walk hand in hand with the people around you. If you're a carpet walker, you're spending the majority of your time in your office. And people are going to notice that. And if you're investing in the relationship, you're going to be out there with them. You're going to meet them in their room. You're going to have the conversation in their room. You're not going to be bringing them to you. If a teacher comes to your office to ask you something, it means you didn't pop by theirs to check. That's kind of a philosophy that I go with too. Yeah. And the third thing that you need to do is, and this one's a bit of a tangent here. You cannot solve every problem that's brought to you, but you need to remove barriers. You need to show people how to remove barriers. If I have a photocopier that's never working, and every time it's broken, I'm the photocopier fixer, and people come to me when it's broken and I have to start fixing the photocopier, I'm never going to have time to do anything else, because that thing breaks 2-3 times a week.
Yeah.
But if I can show people how to fix it, or I say, let's go look at it together and see what we can do, and I fix it once with them, well, the next time it breaks and it does the same thing, they now know how to fix it. Mm-hmm. How does that old saying go?
The whole, you can fish and feed a man for a day, or teach them to fish and feed a person for a lifetime.
Right. And so you remove the barrier by teaching them what to do, and you coach them through it. Mm-hmm. So that's the advice I would give.
Okay, well, that is outstanding. And I really like that. I've never heard the term of don't be a, or the phrase of don't be a carpet walker, but makes total sense. And being able to be with people and seeing that we're working through these things together, I think is so important if you're trying to build that culture of collaboration. So one question we love asking everybody that comes on is a little bit of a reflective practice. So here goes. In the spirit of if you knew then what you know now, what advice would you give your past self in relation to establish and sustaining highly impactful collaborative cultures?
We said it from the get-go, leverage the diversity and value it. And that's a different way of saying recognize that there's a difference between who has the most experience and what is the reflective experience of the room.
Mm-hmm.
And looking back on that, valuing and leveraging that specifically as a teacher in your classroom with your kids is just as powerful in a leadership position as doing that with your teachers.
Mm-hmm. I love you make that connection. I just earlier today had spoke with a leader who had said, he learned early on from a mentor that idea of think of your staff team as you would your classroom. And again, that's not to belittle or demean that your staff are children. I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is in a classroom, we establish routines, structures that are predictable, opportunities for voice, for engagement. We leverage expertise and then determine where's our next place to go, and equated that then to how do you do that then on a staff team? And I thought that was a really powerful understanding that you've definitely alluded to here, Tyler.
Absolutely.
So how can listeners get in touch with you? I mean, I'm going to include some reference points in our show notes as well, but for those that are just listening, how would be the best way for someone to get in touch for a follow-up conversation or to learn more about the work you're doing around these elements?
Yeah, great question, Kurtis. So Elemental Educator is still relatively new. It's only been around for about 2.5, 3 months here. And we're taking off pretty quickly. So recently a new email's come out. So it's tyler@elementaleducator.com. However, elementaleducator@gmail.com is still active and I get emails to both.
Okay.
So either of those is a great way. My main source for pushing content is through my Instagram, elemental_educator. And if you want to reach out through messaging on that, I do respond to them as well if people want to reach out. And coming soon is a website, elementaleducator.com. If you go there right now, you'll get a nice little coming soon landing page. I'm hoping within the next month that becomes active, where you'll also be able to find the podcast, a blog, some discussion forums, and some workshops that I'm going to be pushing out and launching.
Oh, super exciting, Tyler. Well, thank you so much for taking some time out to be able to connect and discuss these elements and how they connect to leading that culture of collaboration that we believe so firmly in impacting education. And I wish you all the best as you continue to endeavor for that wider impact where we started off today. So thanks so much, Tyler.
And thank you, Kurtis, for inviting me. And I think what you're doing here is absolutely incredible, because as a fellow podcaster, this is where we grow the most ourselves too. But
Yeah.
think about the impact zone we get to reach as well. And it's just so cool to know that there's people out there that want to see this collective growth all together.
Absolutely. And I don't know if this is your experience. I find that from a selfish perspective, this becomes incredible PD for me to be able to connect with different thought leaders and to learn through this platform. So,
Absolutely.
all right. Well, wish you all the best and look forward to connecting again soon.
You betcha. Take care.
I always love coming to this part of the podcast where have a chance to reflect on some key learnings. And I'm really, really fascinated by Tyler and the thought and work that he's done around seeing the work that you can do as a leader through these elements that he talks about. And even though he's using different languaging, I think some of these are universal from other guests that we've had on the podcasts, things that that Tyler spoke of that really stuck with me is how do we ensure that we're grounded in our own values and what he refers to as the earth element, but then also trying to establish those from an organizational perspective. And if we have clear understanding of what are our core values, both individually and organizationally, that becomes the mechanism to then begin exploring the next steps, the innovations that we're taking, the decision making, the true work of a collaborative culture has to be embedded or grounded in those values. So I love that. I also loved, and I mentioned it as we were in the conversation, I've never heard before the idea of don't be a carpet walker. And I love how Tyler talked through that. And he's right. As a leader in any capacity, if we're truly invested in growing our culture of collaboration, we can't do it from the office. We have to do it from engaging in conversations with our team. And I love how Tyler sees the team as not just those within the building, but those outside. It again, we hear similar notes around ensuring vulnerability as a leader, but I also love where Tyler went with creating alignment back to our values, and how do we see that through line through all of the work that we're doing in our collaborative efforts. So thank you to Tyler for being able to share. Really excited having this podcast shared out with the larger audience. As always, encourage you to like, subscribe to the podcast. When you do that, it helps to reach a wider audience and be able to just continue to engage in sharing out the thoughts of the amazing guests that we have opportunity to engage in discussion with. Encourage you to share this episode with a friend, and we'll ensure in the show notes that there's reference to a number of the things that Tyler is speaking to. So with that, wish you all the best and look forward to having you engage in our next episode. Take care.
Jigsaw Learning, founded by Kurtis and Lorna Hewson, is a team of educators who work with schools, districts, and educational leaders to establish collaborative response to ensure success for all students. Because every child deserves a team.